The year was 1885, and the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a burning sun that seemed to have no mercy. Tom Mackenzie wiped the sweat from his forehead as he rode his horse Thunder across the rocky terrain. The horse was a beautiful chestnut mare, strong and loyal. She was all Tom had left in this world. Just 6 months ago, Tom had owned a small ranch with cattle and dreams of building something bigger, but bad luck and worse weather had destroyed everything. The bank had taken his land, his cattle, even his savings. Now all he owned was Thunder and the clothes on his back. Tom was heading toward the Mexican border, hoping to find work at one of the bigger ranches down south. He had heard they were always looking for experienced cowboys who knew how to handle cattle and weren't afraid of hard work. At 32 years old, Tom had spent most of his life in the saddle. He could rope, brand, and break horses better than most men half his age. The desert was quiet except for the steady clip-clop of Thunder's hooves on the hard ground. Tom had been riding since dawn, and the sun was now directly overhead, making the air shimmer like water. He pulled his hat down lower to shade his eyes and reached for his water canteen. Only half full. He would need to find water soon. That's when he saw something strange ahead. At first it looked like a pile of rocks near what used to be a stream. But as Thunder got closer, Tom realized it wasn't rocks at all. It was a person, lying very still on the ground. Tom's heart started beating faster. Out here in Apache territory, you never knew what you might find. The Apache tribes had been fighting with settlers in the U.S. Army for years. Some were peaceful, but others were still at war. Tom had heard stories of ambushes and raids that made his blood run cold. But as he got closer, Tom could see this wasn't an ambush. It was a young woman, and she was hurt bad. She was lying on her side, her long black hair spread across the dirt. Her clothes were torn and there was blood on her shirt. Tom could see an arrow sticking out of her side just below her ribs. Tom stopped Thunder about 20 feet away and looked around carefully. The desert was empty in all directions. No signs of other people, no horses, no weapons lying around. Just this injured woman who looked like she might be Apache. Thunder snorted and pawed the ground nervously. Horses could sense danger, and Thunder was telling Tom to be careful. But looking at the woman, Tom could see she wasn't moving much. Her breathing was shallow and quick. If he didn't help her soon, she was going to die. Tom had a choice to make, and he had to make it fast. The smart thing would be to ride away. Apache warriors didn't take kindly to strangers, especially white settlers. If this woman's family found Tom with her, they might think he had hurt her. That could mean a very painful death, but Tom couldn't just ride away and let someone die. It went against everything his mother had taught him when he was growing up back in Missouri. She used to say that helping people was what separated good folks from bad folks, no matter who they were or what they looked like. Tom climbed down from Thunder and walked slowly toward the woman. As he got closer, he could see she was young, maybe 20 years old. Her face was pale and her lips were dry and cracked. The arrow in her side wasn't bleeding much anymore, which could be good or bad. Sometimes that meant the bleeding had stopped. Other times it meant the person was running out of blood. He knelt down beside her and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes opened, and Tom found himself looking into the darkest, most frightened eyes he had ever seen. She tried to sit up, but fell back with a gasp of pain. "Easy there," Tom said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." The woman said something in a language Tom didn't understand, but her voice was weak and desperate. She kept looking at the arrow in her side, then back at Tom's face. Her eyes were asking him a question he couldn't understand, but he thought he knew what she meant. She wanted to know if he was going to help her or leave her to die. Tom looked at the arrow more carefully. It wasn't an Apache arrow. The feathers were different and the point was made of metal instead of stone. This meant she had been shot by someone else, probably soldiers or other settlers. She wasn't a threat. She was a victim, just like he had been when the bank took his ranch. The nearest town with a doctor was 2 days away by horse. If Tom tried to pull the arrow out himself, he might make things worse. The woman needed real medical help, and she needed it fast. But she was too weak to ride by herself, and Tom couldn't walk alongside Thunder for 2 days in this heat. That's when Tom made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would put the woman on Thunder and walk beside them to town. It would be dangerous and exhausting, but it was the right thing to do. Tom went back to Thunder and untied his bedroll from the saddle. He spread the blanket on the ground next to the woman and very gently rolled her onto it. She cried out in pain, but she seemed to understand that he was trying to help. Tom wrapped the blanket around her carefully, making sure not to move the arrow. Then came the hard part. Tom had to lift her onto Thunder's back without hurting her more. The woman was small, but she was dead weight, and Tom had to be extremely careful. Thunder stood perfectly still, as if she understood how important this was. Finally, Tom got the woman settled in his saddle. She slumped forward, unconscious from the pain, but she was secure. Tom tied his rope around her waist and the saddle horn to make sure she wouldn't fall off. Tom took Thunder's reins and started walking toward the northeast, where the trading post sat in a valley between two hills. The sun was already past its highest point, which meant he had been working for over an hour. At this pace, with stops for rest and water, it would take him at least 2 full days to reach help. As they started their journey, Tom wondered what he had gotten himself into. He was risking his life for a complete stranger who might not even live long enough to reach the doctor. If Apache warriors found them, they might kill Tom first and ask questions later. If the woman died along the way, Tom would have Thunder back, but he would have to live with the guilt for the rest of his life. But as they walked across the desert, Tom felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt like he was doing something that mattered. For the first time since losing his ranch, he had a purpose that was bigger than just surviving another day. Thunder walked steadily beside him, her ears always moving, listening for danger. The woman on her back breathed in small, quick gasps, but she was still breathing. That was all Tom could ask for right now. The desert stretched ahead of them, endless and unforgiving. Tom pulled his hat down tight and started counting his steps. 1 step closer to help. 1 step closer to saving a life. 1 step into a future he couldn't possibly imagine. The first day of walking nearly killed Tom. The desert sun was like a hammer beating down on his head, and the rocky ground hurt his feet through his worn-out boots. Every few hours he would stop and check on the woman. Sometimes she was awake, looking at him with those dark eyes. Other times she was unconscious, her breathing so shallow that Tom had to put his ear close to her mouth to make sure she was still alive. Thunder was suffering too. Horses weren't meant to carry someone for this long without rest, especially not in this heat. But the mare never complained. She just kept walking, step after step, as loyal as any friend Tom had ever known. By evening of the first day, Tom's water was almost gone. He had been giving most of it to the woman, trying to keep her alive. His lips were cracked and his tongue felt like leather in his mouth. But they couldn't stop for long. Every hour they waited was another hour closer to the woman's death. They walked through the night, guided by the stars and the pale light of the moon. Tom had made this trip before, so he knew the way. But walking was different from riding. Everything took longer and every step was harder than the last. The woman woke up several times during the night. She would say things in her language that Tom couldn't understand, but her voice sounded grateful. Once she touched his hand when he was giving her water. Her fingers were cold and weak, but Tom felt like she was trying to say thank you. By dawn of the second day, Tom was stumbling more, then walking. His legs felt like they were made of wood, and his head was spinning from thirst and exhaustion. The woman was getting worse too. Her breathing was more labored, and she hadn't opened her eyes in hours. That's when Tom saw something that made his heart jump with relief. Smoke was rising from behind a hill about 2 miles ahead. It was the trading post run by an old man named Pete Hoffman and his wife Mary. Pete used to be a doctor back east before he came to Arizona, and he still helped people when they got hurt. Tom pushed himself harder than he ever had before. His feet were bleeding inside his boots, and every muscle in his body screamed with pain. But he could see the finish line, and he wasn't going to give up now. When they finally reached the trading post, Mary Hoffman took one look at them and started shouting for her husband. Pete came running out with his medical bag, his gray beard flying in the wind. "Good Lord, Tom, what happened?" Pete asked as he helped lift the woman down from Thunder's back. Found her in the desert, Tom gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Apache girl shot with an arrow. Been walking for 2 days. Pete and Mary carried the woman inside while Tom collapsed next to the water trough. He dunked his whole head in the cool water and drank until his stomach hurt. Thunder was drinking too, taking long, desperate gulps. Inside the trading post, Pete was working on the woman with all the skill he had learned as a real doctor. Tom could hear him talking to Mary, asking for bandages and medicine. The woman cried out in pain when Pete pulled the arrow out, but that was actually a good sign. It meant she was still strong enough to feel pain. Tom waited outside for what felt like hours. Other people at the trading post, mostly travelers and local ranchers, gathered around to hear the story. Some of them shook their heads like Tom was crazy for helping an Apache. Others said he was a hero. Tom didn't feel like either one. He just felt tired. Finally, Pete came outside, wiping blood off his hands with a rag. She's going to live, he said, and Tom felt like a huge weight had been lifted off his chest. But it was close. Another few hours and she would have been gone. You saved her life, son. Tom nodded, too exhausted to say much. Pete continued. The arrow missed her vital organs, but she lost a lot of blood. She needs rest, good food, and proper care for at least 3 weeks before she can travel again. That's when Tom's heart sank. 3 weeks. He had enough money for maybe 3 days of food and shelter at the trading post. After that, he would have to move on, find work somewhere else. But how could he leave when the woman still needed help? Pete seemed to read his mind. Don't worry about the cost, Tom. Mary and I will take care of her. It's the Christian thing to do. But Tom shook his head. I appreciate that, Pete, but I started this, and I'm going to finish it. That girl needs to get back to her people safely, and that means she needs a horse. Tom looked at Thunder, who was still drinking water and resting in the shade. The mare had carried them all this way without complaint. She was strong, fast, and well-trained. In the right hands, she could get the Apache woman back to her tribe, safely. I want to give her Thunder, Tom said quietly. Pete's eyes went wide. Tom, you can't be serious. That horse is all you have. Without her, you're stuck out here with no way to make a living. Tom knew Pete was right. Cowboys needed horses like farmers needed land. Without Thunder, Tom couldn't work cattle, couldn't travel to find jobs, couldn't do much of anything in this part of the country. He would be stranded, probably for good. But as Tom looked through the window at the young woman lying on Pete's bed, he knew what he had to do. She had been shot, probably by people who hated her just because she was Apache. She had been left to die in the desert like an animal. Now she had a chance to live, to go back to her family and her people. Tom wasn't going to let her lose that chance because she didn't have a horse. My mind's made up, Tom said. When she's strong enough to travel, Thunder goes with her. Pete tried to argue, but Tom wouldn't listen. Mary came out and tried to talk sense into him too. Even some of the other people at the trading post said he was making a mistake. But Tom had made his choice, and he wasn't going to change his mind. He spent the next week working around the trading post, doing odd jobs to pay for his food and a place to sleep. Every day, he checked on the woman. Slowly, she was getting stronger. By the end of the week, she was sitting up and eating solid food. Pete's wife had given her clean clothes and had been teaching her a few words of English. The woman had learned to say Tom and thank you, which she said every time she saw him. Tom learned that her name was Ayanna, which Mary said meant something like eternal flower in Apache. Ayanna was the daughter of a war chief, which explained why she had been dressed in such fine clothes when Tom found her. It also meant that her family was probably looking for her, and they wouldn't be happy if they thought white settlers had hurt her. On the 10th day, Ayanna was strong enough to walk around the trading post. She spent a lot of time with Thunder, brushing the horse's coat and feeding her apples. Thunder seemed to like Ayanna, which was unusual. Thunder was normally shy around strangers. That's when Tom made his announcement. He gathered everyone at the trading post and told them his plan. Ayanna would take Thunder and ride back to her people. Tom would stay at the trading post until he could figure out what to do next. The room went quiet. Ayanna looked at Tom with confusion, then at Pete, then back at Tom. She said something in Apache that sounded like a question. Mary translated as best she could. She wants to know why you would give her your horse. She says in her culture a man's horse is like his brother. Tom looked at Ayanna and spoke slowly, hoping she would understand some of his words. Because you need Thunder more than I do right now. You have family waiting for you. I want you to get home safe. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears. She walked over to Tom and took his hands in hers. She spoke in Apache for a long time, her voice serious and grateful. When she finished, she bowed her head to Tom in a way that felt very formal and important. Mary wiped her own eyes. I think she's giving you some kind of blessing or promise. I don't understand all of it, but I think she's saying she'll never forget what you've done. The next morning, Tom helped Ayanna saddle Thunder for the journey home. The horse was rested and well fed, ready for the long ride back to Apache territory. Tom had packed extra water and food in the saddlebags, along with a blanket and some basic supplies. As Ayanna climbed onto Thunder's back, she looked down at Tom one last time. She said something in Apache, then added in careful English, "Thank you, Tom. I remember always." Tom watched her ride away until she was just a tiny dot on the horizon. Then he turned and walked back into the trading post, knowing that his life had just changed forever. He had no horse, very little money, and no clear plan for the future. But for some reason he couldn't explain. Tom felt good about what he had done. Really good. Maybe for the first time since he had lost his ranch. He had saved a life and helped someone get back to their family. That had to count for something, even if it left him with nothing. What Tom didn't know was that Ayanna's gratitude would soon become something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. After Ayanna rode away on Thunder, Tom felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. For 3 days he stayed at the trading post, helping Pete and Mary with chores and trying to figure out what to do next. But he couldn't stay there forever. Pete and Mary were kind people, but they couldn't afford to feed and house him for much longer. Tom had exactly $7.35 to his name. That might buy him food for a week if he was careful, but it wouldn't get him a new horse or passage on a stagecoach to somewhere with better job opportunities. The nearest big town was over 100 miles away, and the only way to get there without a horse was to walk. So that's exactly what Tom decided to do. On a cool morning in early September, Tom packed his few belongings into a canvas bag and started walking toward his old cabin. It wasn't much of a home anymore, just a one-room shack he had built when he first came to Arizona. But at least it was his, and at least it would give him a place to think about his future. The walk home would take him 4 days if he pushed hard. Tom had walked long distances before, but never while carrying everything he owned on his back. The desert was unforgiving, and he would have to be smart about water and rest if he wanted to make it alive. Meanwhile, back at her family's camp, Ayanna was causing quite a stir. She had been missing for almost 2 weeks, and her father, Chief Nalnish, had sent search parties in every direction. When she finally rode into camp on a strange horse, the entire tribe gathered to hear her story. Ayanna told them everything. How she had been shot by soldiers while gathering herbs near the border. How she had crawled to the dry creek bed to hide. How she had been ready to die when the white cowboy found her. How he had risked his life to save her, walking for days in the desert heat. But the most incredible part of the story was what Tom had done with his horse. In Apache culture, a man's horse was sacred, almost like a part of his soul. To give away your horse to help a stranger, especially someone from a different tribe, was almost unthinkable. It was the kind of generosity that demanded respect, even from enemies. Chief Nalnish listened to his daughter's story with growing amazement. He was a wise man who had led his people through many difficult times. He had fought against white settlers who stole Apache land and killed Apache families. But he had also learned that not all white men were the same. Some, like this Tom Mackenzie, had honor. "This cowboy saved my daughter's life," the chief said to his council of warriors. "He gave up everything he owned to help her. In our culture, Such a debt can never be repaid with words alone. The Apache had a tradition called blood debt, which meant that when someone saved your life, you owed them a debt that could only be repaid with equally great generosity. But this was more than just one person helping another. Tom had shown respect for Apache culture by helping Ayanna without asking for anything in return. That kind of honor had to be recognized. While the Apache were discussing what to do about Tom, the cowboy himself was struggling across the desert on foot. By the second day of walking, his feet were covered in blisters and his shoulders ached from carrying his pack. The sun was merciless and his water was running low faster than he had planned. Tom had to rest more often than he wanted to, which meant the journey was taking longer than expected. On the third day, he ran out of food completely. He was still a full day away from his cabin, and he was starting to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. That night, as Tom lay on his blanket looking up at the stars, he thought about Thunder. He wondered if Ayanna had made it safely back to her people. He wondered if the horse was being treated well. Despite his own suffering, Tom felt good knowing that he had done the right thing. On the fourth day, Tom was so exhausted he could barely put one foot in front of the other. His lips were cracked and bleeding, and his vision was blurry from dehydration. But finally, just as the sun was setting, he saw his little cabin in the distance. Tom stumbled the last few hundred yards and collapsed on his front porch. He had made it, but just barely. Inside the cabin, he found some old canned food and a jug of water he had left behind. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him alive for a few days while he figured out his next move. As Tom ate his meager dinner, he took stock of his situation. He had no horse, no cattle, and almost no money. The nearest ranch where he might find work was 20 miles away, and he would have to walk there too. Even if they hired him, it would be as a basic hand, not a real cowboy. Without a horse, he couldn't do most of the jobs he was trained for. But Tom wasn't the type to give up easily. He spent the next few days fixing up his cabin and planning his future. Maybe he could work as a blacksmith's helper, or help build houses in one of the growing towns. It wouldn't be the life he had dreamed of, but it would be honest work. Back at the Apache camp, Chief Nalnish had made his decision. He called together 70 of his best warriors, men who had fought beside him in many battles. These were the bravest and most respected fighters in the tribe, and they would help him pay back the debt they owed to Tom Mackenzie. Ayanna had told her father exactly where Tom lived, describing the landmarks she had seen when white settlers had first brought her to that area years ago. The chief knew it would take them most of a day to reach the cowboy's cabin, but that was fine. What they were planning required perfect timing. The Apache warriors spent 2 days preparing for their journey. They selected the finest horses from their herds along with gifts that would show proper respect for what Tom had done. Chief Nalnish wanted to make sure that Tom understood this wasn't charity, but payment of a debt that honor demanded they repay. On the morning they were ready to leave, Ayanna asked to come with them. She wanted to see Tom again, to thank him, properly now that she was healthy and strong. But more than that, she wanted to make sure he understood that what he had done would never be forgotten by her people. Chief Nalnish agreed to let his daughter come, but only if she promised to stay. Back during the initial meeting, Apache customs were very specific about how such formal ceremonies should be conducted, and Ayanna's presence at the wrong moment might confuse Tom or make him think they were there for a different reason. As the 70 warriors and their chief prepared to ride toward Tom's cabin, word spread throughout the Apache camp about what was happening. Children ran alongside the horses as they left, and elderly people offered blessings for the journey. Everyone understood that this was a historic moment, something that would be talked about for generations. What they were about to do was unprecedented. Apache warriors didn't usually make friendly visits to white settlers. The two peoples had been enemies for so long that most folks on both sides couldn't imagine any other relationship. But Tom Mackenzie had changed that, at least for this one Apache family and tribe. His simple act of kindness had opened a door that had been closed for decades. What happened when that door fully opened would depend on how the next few hours went. Meanwhile, Tom was chopping wood behind his cabin, trying to prepare for the coming winter. He had found some work helping a neighbor repair his barn, which had given him enough money to buy basic supplies. It wasn't much, but Tom was grateful for anything that kept him going. He had no idea that 70 Apache warriors were riding toward his home at that very moment, or that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. As the sun began to set on what Tom thought would be just another quiet evening alone in his cabin, the sound of horses in the distance would soon reach his ears, and when it did, everything he thought he knew about his future would be turned upside down. The Apache were coming, and they were bringing gifts that would make Tom Mackenzie one of the richest and most respected men in all of Arizona territory. Tom woke up to the sound that every frontier settler feared most: horses approaching his cabin in the pre-dawn darkness. Many horses. More horses than had any business being near his little homestead at 5 in the morning. He lay perfectly still in his bed, listening carefully. The horses were moving slowly, deliberately, like riders who knew exactly where they were going and weren't in any hurry to get there. Tom counted the hoofbeats in his head. 10 horses, 20, 30, maybe more. His heart started pounding so hard he was sure the riders could hear it. Tom slipped out of bed and crawled to his window, staying low so he wouldn't be seen. What he saw outside made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. In the pale light of dawn, he could make out the shapes of mounted warriors surrounding his cabin. They sat perfectly still on their horses, like statues carved from shadow. Even in the dim light, Tom could tell they were Apache. He could see the distinctive way they wore their hair, the style of their clothes, the way they sat their horses like they were born in the saddle, and they were armed. Tom could see rifles, bows, and the glint of metal that meant knives and tomahawks. Tom's mind raced through his options, and none of them were good. He had one old rifle and maybe 20 bullets. Against this many warriors, he wouldn't last 5 minutes if they wanted him dead. Running was out of the question. Apache horses were faster than anything he could do on foot, and he knew these warriors could track a mouse across solid rock if they wanted to. The smart thing would be to stay inside and hope they went away. But Tom had a sinking feeling that wasn't going to happen. They had come here for a reason, and that reason was probably him. As the sun came up higher, Tom could see more details. There were at least 70 warriors out there, maybe more. This wasn't a raiding party. This was a war band, the kind that could wipe out an entire settlement if they wanted to. The kind that made grown men wet themselves with fear. What made it even scarier was how organized they looked. These weren't young hotheads looking for trouble. These were experienced fighters, disciplined and deadly. They sat their horses in perfect formation, waiting for something, waiting for orders maybe, or waiting for Tom to come outside. Tom tried to think of what he might have done to deserve this. Had he accidentally crossed onto Apache land? Had someone told them he was the one who had helped Ayanna? Maybe they thought he had hurt her or kidnapped her or worse. Maybe they didn't know that he had saved her life. The waiting was the worst part. Tom had been in dangerous situations before, but at least then he had known what was happening. This was like waiting for lightning to strike, knowing it was coming but not knowing when. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Tom heard a voice calling out in English. It was a deep, powerful voice that carried authority. "Tom Mackenzie, come out, we want to talk." Tom's hands were shaking as he picked up his rifle. He checked to make sure it was loaded, even though he knew it wouldn't do him much good against 70 warriors. But holding it made him feel a little braver, even if that bravery was mostly pretend. Tom took a deep breath and opened his cabin door. The morning air was cool and crisp, and he could smell the horses and leather and something else, something like sage and smoke that he associated with Apache camps. As Tom stepped outside, he got his first clear look at what he was facing. The warriors were arranged in a perfect circle around his cabin, their horses standing so still they might have been painted on the landscape. Every man was armed and ready for war, their faces painted with designs that Tom didn't understand, but knew meant serious business. In front of the group, sitting on a magnificent black horse, was a man who could only be their leader. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long gray hair braided with feathers and silver. His face was weathered like old leather, and his eyes were the hardest thing Tom had ever seen. This was a man who had fought many battles and won most of them. Tom walked slowly toward the center of the circle, his rifle held down by his side where it wouldn't look too threatening. He stopped about 20 feet from the leader and waited. In situations like this, it was better to let the other person talk first. The Apache chief studied Tom for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in every detail. Tom tried to stand straight and look braver than he felt, but he was pretty sure the chief could see right through him. Finally, the chief spoke. "You are Tom Mackenzie?" "Yes, sir, I am," Tom replied, surprised that his voice sounded almost normal. "I am Chief Nalnish of the Chiricahua Apache. You know why we are here?" Tom's mind raced. This had to be about Ayanna, but he wasn't sure if they were here to thank him or kill him. "I think it might be about your daughter, sir. Ayanna. I found her hurt in the desert a few weeks back." The chief nodded slowly. "My daughter has told me what you did. She says you saved her life." Tom felt a tiny bit of relief. At least they knew he hadn't hurt her. "She was in bad shape when I found her. Anybody would have done the same thing." "No," the chief said firmly. "Not anybody. You gave up your horse so she could return to her people. You walked across the desert on foot and nearly died doing it. That is not what anybody would do. That is what a man of honor does." Tom didn't know what to say to that. He had just done what felt right at the time. He hadn't thought of it as anything special. Chief Nalnish continued, "In our culture, when someone saves the life of your family, you owe them a debt. This debt must be paid, or there is no honor." Tom's heart sank. He had heard stories about Apache debts and how they were collected. Sometimes it meant working as a slave for years. Sometimes it meant giving up everything you owned. Sometimes it meant things too terrible to think about. "Sir, I don't want any payment," Tom said quickly. "I was happy to help Ayanna. She's a fine young woman and she deserved to get home safe. That's payment enough for me." The chief's expression didn't change. "The debt must be paid," he repeated. "But you do not understand what kind of debt this is." Tom felt his legs getting weak. This was it. This was where they told him he was going to spend the rest of his life as their prisoner, or worse. He gripped his rifle tighter, even though he knew it was useless. Chief Nalnish raised his hand and one of the other warriors rode forward leading a horse. It was Thunder, looking healthy and well cared for. Ayanna was riding on the horse's back, but she slipped down and walked toward Tom with a big smile on her face. "Tom," she said in English, much better English than she had spoken at the trading post. "I am so happy to see you." Tom was confused. If they were here to punish him, why was Ayanna acting so happy? Why had they brought Thunder back? Ayanna walked right up to Tom and took his hands in hers, just like she had done at the trading post. But this time, she spoke in clear English. "Father and our warriors have come to honor you," she said. "What you did for me was the most generous thing anyone has ever done. You gave up everything to save someone you didn't even know. In our culture, that kind of honor must be rewarded." Tom looked around at all the warriors surrounding him. Their faces had changed. Instead of looking threatening, they looked respectful. Some were even smiling. Tom began to realize that maybe, just maybe, he had been worrying about the wrong thing. Chief Nalnish dismounted from his horse and walked toward Tom. When he was close enough to touch, the chief did something that shocked Tom to his core. The great warrior, the leader of 70 of the fiercest fighters in Arizona, bowed his head to a broken-down cowboy who owned nothing but the clothes on his back. "Tom Mackenzie," the chief said in a voice that carried across the desert morning, "you're about to learn what it means to have the friendship of the Apache people." What happened next was something Tom Mackenzie would remember for the rest of his life, and something he would have trouble believing even as it was happening to him. Chief Nalnish raised his hand, and the circle of warriors began to move. But, instead of charging toward Tom with weapons drawn, they started bringing him gifts. One by one, they rode forward and placed items on the ground in front of his cabin. The first warrior brought a rifle, brand new and better than anything Tom had ever owned. The second brought a leather bag filled with silver coins that clinked together like music. The third brought a beautiful saddle decorated with silver studs and intricate beadwork. Tom stood there with his mouth hanging open, not understanding what was happening. Ayanna stayed beside him, translating as her father spoke. "My father says that when an Apache saves your life, the debt is paid with your life," she explained. "But when someone outside our tribe saves an Apache life, especially someone who gives up everything they own to do it, that is a different kind of debt. That is a debt of honor, and it must be paid with honor." More warriors came forward. They brought blankets woven with patterns that told stories. They brought jewelry made from turquoise and silver that was worth more money than Tom had ever seen in one place. They brought tools and weapons and bags of food that would last him through the winter. But the biggest shock was still coming. Chief Nalnish gestured again, and 6 warriors rode forward leading horses. Not just any horses, but some of the finest animals Tom had ever laid eyes on. These were Apache war horses, trained for speed and intelligence, bred for strength and endurance. Each one was worth more than Tom's old ranch had been. "These horses are yours," Ayanna translated as her father spoke, "but that is not the greatest gift my father has for you." Tom couldn't imagine what could be greater than what he had already been given. The pile of gifts in front of his cabin was worth more than most people earned in 10 years of hard work. Chief Nalnish stepped closer to Tom and began speaking in Apache. His voice was formal and serious, like he was making some kind of official announcement. The other warriors listened carefully, and Tom could tell that whatever was being said was very important. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears as she translated. "My father is making you an honorary member of our tribe. He says that from this day forward you are not just Tom Mackenzie the cowboy. You are Tom Mackenzie, friend of the Apache people. You are our brother." Tom felt his own eyes getting wet. "I don't understand. What does that mean exactly?" Ayanna smiled through her tears. "It means that anywhere you go in Apache territory, you will be protected and cared for. If you are hungry, we will feed you. If you are in danger, we will fight for you. If you need help, we will give it without question. And not just from our band, but from any Apache who learns your name." Chief Nalnish reached into a leather pouch and pulled out an eagle feather, the most sacred symbol in Apache culture. He placed it in Tom's hand and spoke again. "He says this feather will identify you to any Apache as a friend and brother," Ayanna translated. "If you ever show this feather to an Apache warrior, they will know that you are under the protection of Chief Nalnish and all his people." But the chief wasn't finished. He spoke again, and this time his voice was even more serious. "My father is making one more promise," Ayanna said. "He is promising that this honor will pass to your children and your children's children. For as long as the Apache people exist, the family of Tom Mackenzie will be considered family to us." Tom was overwhelmed. He had never expected anything like this when he decided to help a wounded stranger in the desert. All he had wanted to do was save someone's life. Now he was being honored like a hero, given wealth he had never dreamed of, and promised protection and friendship that would last for generations. "I don't know what to say," Tom managed to get out. "This is too much. I just did what anyone should do." Chief Nalnish smiled for the first time since arriving at the cabin. He said something in Apache that made all the warriors chuckle. "He says that you keep saying anyone would have done what you did," Ayanna translated with a grin. "But he has lived for 53 years and has never met another white man who would give up his horse to save an Apache woman. He says maybe you don't know how special you are, but we do." The ceremony continued for another hour. Each warrior came forward individually to shake Tom's hand or place a hand on his shoulder. It was their way of welcoming him into their extended family. Some of them spoke a few words in broken English, telling Tom that he was brave and honorable. Through it all, Thunder stood patiently nearby, wearing a new bridle decorated with silver and turquoise. When the formal ceremony was over, Ayanna led the horse over to Tom. "Thunder missed you," she said simply. "She is a good horse, but she knew she belonged with you. My father says a man and his horse should not be separated when they belong together." Tom ran his hands over Thunder's neck, and the horse nuzzled against him affectionately. It felt good to have his old friend back. But now Thunder wasn't his only horse. He was suddenly the owner of one of the finest herds in all of Arizona Territory. As the morning wore on, Chief Nalnish explained more about what this new relationship meant. Tom would always be welcome at any Apache camp. If he ever wanted to trade horses or cattle, the Apache would give him the best deals possible. If he ever had trouble with outlaws or hostile tribes, he could call on Apache warriors for help. In return, Tom was expected to treat all Apache people with respect and kindness. If Apache travelers ever came to his cabin looking for food or shelter, he should help them if he could. And most importantly, he should never forget that his actions had created a bridge between two peoples who had been enemies for far too long. "There are white men who hate us just because we are Apache," Chief Nalnish said through Ayana's translation. "And there are Apache who hate all white men because of what some white men have done to our people. But you have shown that there is another way. You have shown that people can see past the color of skin to the heart underneath." As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the ceremony finally came to an end. The warriors began preparing to ride back to their camp, but not before helping Tom move all his gifts into his cabin. The small building was packed with more wealth than Tom had ever imagined possessing. Chief Nalnish was the last to leave. He shook Tom's hand one final time and said something in Apache that Ayana didn't need to translate. Tom could see the meaning in the old warrior's eyes: respect, gratitude, and genuine friendship. Ayana was the very last to go. She hugged Tom like he was her older brother, which in a way, he now was. "I will never forget what you did for me," she said, "and neither will my children or their children. Your name will be remembered in Apache stories for as long as our people exist." As Tom watched the 70 warriors ride away across the desert, he felt like he was living in a dream. That morning he had been a broke cowboy with no future and no hope. Now he was wealthy beyond his wildest imagination, and had the friendship and protection of one of the most powerful tribes in the Southwest. But more than the horses and silver and gifts, Tom treasured the knowledge that he had done something truly good in the world. He had saved a life, and in doing so, had created something beautiful and lasting between two groups of people who had been enemies for too long. Tom spent the rest of that day taking inventory of his gifts and trying to figure out where to put everything. He would need to build a bigger cabin, and definitely a proper stable for all those horses. He would need to learn how to manage wealth, something he had never had to worry about before. But as the sun set on what had been the most amazing day of his life, Tom sat on his porch with Thunder grazing nearby and thought about the simple choice he had made in the desert weeks ago: help a stranger, or ride away and mind his own business. He had chosen to help, and that choice had changed everything, not just for him, but for Ayana, for Chief Nalnish, for 70 Apache warriors, and for countless people in the future who would benefit from the friendship that had been born from one man's simple act of kindness. Tom Mackenzie had learned something that day that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply treat another human being with decency and respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. Sometimes that's enough to change the world, one person at a time. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world changes you right back in the most wonderful way possible.